Hello there! Let's finish off our last voiceover video for this chapter by talking a little about testing for genetic mutations. So if you have loved doing Punnett squares and learning about disorders that are related to the issues with genes and all that stuff, I might have just the job of your dreams for you. You might want to consider becoming a genetic counselor. So what they do, for example, is that they give advice to parents about the risks of certain inherited conditions based on their genotype and things like that. They often work with other healthcare providers too. The job would also include discussing testing options, risks, benefits, and limitations. And in general, just helping the families to make informed choices. And when we talk about all this, we get back to our good old friend karyotyping. We remember that a karyotype was this visual display of chromosome pairs as arranged by their size. Other things that we can see here are the shape, number, and banding pattern. How do we actually get a karyotype of an unborn baby? Well, we need to get some cells from that baby, and usually these would be either white blood cells or using sampling of the amniotic fluid or hoping to catch the fetus's cells from it or doing something called chorionic villus sampling. So there are a few methods how we can do this. But we need some cells from the baby so that we can study the DNA from those cells. So how does the sampling of amniotic fluid work? Well, we actually use a long needle to withdraw a sample from the fluid surrounding the fetus. And in that fluid, we usually find some cells from the fetus. And it is these cells that we really want. This method is relatively safe, and the needle can be guided by an ultrasound. And in terms of the safety of this method, it says a lot that there is only about 0.3% risk of it causing a spontaneous abortion. One of the challenges with this method, though, is that it cannot be performed until after 14th or 17th week of pregnancy, depending on a few factors. Another method that I mentioned was sampling the cells from where the placenta is developing. And this is done by suction of some cells from the chorion, which is the site where the placenta is developing. And we remember that a placenta contains both mother's and the developing child's cells, so this is a way to get cells from the fetus in a relatively safe manner. One of the benefits of this method is that it can be performed as early as on the 5th week of pregnancy. However, there is a little greater risk, I believe 0.8%, of a spontaneous abortion being triggered by this procedure. And sometimes, even if we do not have a concern about a chromosomal abnormality based on the family history, we might still wish to do these tests. This is because they can tell us about more than 400 different disorders that result from specific genes. Of course, it is important for the genetic counselor to know about the medical history of the family so that they can do these pedigrees. And that work largely determines what tests are needed. So what can we test for at large? Well, we can test for a protein or the DNA. So we can use either the genetic markers or genetic profiling. One method includes using DNA microarrays, which are basically these small chips made of silicon, and they screen at one time many things. And another option is what I use to teach for a living, ultrasound. So that is using a high-frequency sound waves to construct an image. And I believe that we already touched upon on the testing of fetal cells. One more thing that I want to quickly discuss with you about is these genetic over-the-counter home test kits. And we watched that cute video about one of these at the beginning of the last module, but do remember that it was an advert. And what you find out is that there is a huge number of different kinds of tests available. It seems like everyone is tapping onto this market. And there are some really weird ones too. Like test your alcohol tolerance based on your DNA. Or lactose intolerance DNA test. Or joint injury likelihood DNA home test kit. What else have I seen? I remember tests for hair and aging of the skin and hunger and weight. Well, basically tests for everything imaginable and things that you never even knew to imagine. One thing to remember though is that they are not regulated by the FDA. This is the Food and Drug Administration, which regulates most of these kind of things. So there is no standard on the quality or accuracy of the information that you get out of them. But if you are not too worried about it, it can be fun. But another thing that concerns me as a medical professional with some background on these things is that what happens to your data. Let's do an exercise. How many of you really read through the terms and conditions of an ad or a software that you have just installed to your computer? I mean, I will be the first one to admit that I never do. Ain't no one got time for that. If you try to read them, they are usually tens of pages long and of a legal format text. So I have no clue what it is about. But when you click on that agreeing to terms and conditions buttons, you have to allow whatever is said on those terms and conditions. Who knows if Apple was to add somewhere that by clicking this you allow us to do whatever we want with your credit card details, I would probably have already signed my life away. But the reason why I find this problematic with these genetic tests is that you would need to be very certain and clear of what they are going to do with your data that they collect. Because if your data is not treated safely, or if it is shared, and a lot of time you have to provide quite a lot of other information with these tests, it can open a huge can of worms. Imagine if you are not tested for it, but sample is saved for and later on used to find out if you are more likely to develop some disease. And if that disease was to be a potential risk for an employer or an insurance company, and for that reason you lose out on your dream job or have to pay more for your insurance, well, I guess that what I'm trying to say is that you never know. And what if a test tells you something that is a big deal of a negative thing? I would recommend of having a medical professional available to discuss these results with you, but for the price of these test kits, that is not unfortunately included. Really, the only thing you own in this world is your own DNA. And to give that away without knowing what terms you sign, well, for me it sounds a bit foolish. But I am not trying to discourage anyone from doing these tests, but just be aware that there is things to be considered at least. So this is where we will finish off the voiceover presentation for this chapter, and I have one quick time-lapse video for you to finish this chapter. Let's see you again soon!